Welcome to Maths Made Easy. The topic for this video class will be factorization. Okay guys, when working with factorization, everyone thinks it is complicated and it's difficult, but it's actually really simple. Now I'm going to go through the steps with you. You can pause the video at any time to write it down, but the steps will progress as we carry on. Saying this, the video will be split into two parts. The first part will be for the grade 9s and then the second part for the grade 10. So if you are grade 9, you can stop the video once we are done with the grade 9 topics, and if you are grade 10, you can simply skip to the time frame where we start your equations, or you can watch the video from the beginning and get the perspective from the grade 9 stuff up to now. So let's quickly start with the steps, guys. If we look at factorization as a whole, then you have steps that you have to follow. So the first and the very first step that we will have to look at is when we are working with factorization. The first step will be to take out your highest common factor. Now, once you've taken out your highest common factor, you will need to determine the number of terms. This will be your second step. From then out, it's going to differ from how many terms the example or the question will have. So if it's a two term, you will need to check that it is a square subtracting a square. If it is a square subtracting a square, you can factorize it into two sets of brackets and then the signs will differ. If it is not a square subtracting a square, you may not factorize a two term. Okay. If it is a three term, then the first step will be a sign. This is for the grade 10. You have to check your signs. Okay. But I will explain this as we reach the part for the grade 10s. After you check your signs, you're going to go to your brackets. Now, all I'm going to say for the grade 10s right now is that if it is, when you are checking your signs, your very last sign will determine whether the brackets will be the same, whether the signs of the brackets will be the same. So listen very carefully and write this in your own words for me, all the grade 10s now. The last sign will determine whether the bracket signs will be the same. If the last sign is a positive, then both of the brackets, the sign of both of the brackets will then be the first sign in the question. But if the last sign is a negative, then the signs in these brackets will differ. Okay, now let's quickly go look at the examples for the grade 9s. So for grade 9s, I've already done the examples and I've written it out for you, but I'm quickly going to go over this for you. So the first step is to take out the highest common factor. Now, when taking out the highest common factor, you need to work with the coefficients and you need to work with the unknowns as well. So let's work with the coefficients first. So looking at this, it is a 3 and a 9. Now the highest common factor in the 3 will be the 3 itself, because 3 can be divided by 3 itself. Remember, you cannot take out 1 as a highest common factor. That is not possible. You may not do that. So what is the factors of 3? Only 1 and 3. So obviously the 3 will be the highest common factor. But the question is, can 3 be divided into a 9? Yes, it can, 3 times. So that means 3 is also a factor of 9. That's why we may take out the 3 as a factor. Let's go to the unknowns, x to the power of 3 and x to the power of 2. This means we basically have 3x's here and 2x's here. So the highest common factor will be x to the power of 2, because x to the power of 3 can be divided by x to the power of 2. That means that x to the power of 2 is a factor of x to the power of 3. So you may take out x to the power of 2. So the highest common factor will be 3x squared. After you've taken out your highest common factor, you put down an open bracket. Then you say 3 can be divided into 3 itself once. Then you say that x to the power of 3 can be divided by x to the power of 2, and what will remain? Only an x to the power of 1. Then minus 3 can be divided into a 9, and then it can be divided into 9 3 times, so you put down the 3 here. And then x squared can be divided into x squared once, only once. So you just put a 1 there. You close your bracket. After that, you write down your highest common factor as is again. Open the brackets, you simplify. So now 1 times x will remain x. negative stays negative. This comes from the question itself, which is also a negative. And then 3 times 1 will be 3 only. Close your bracket. Now this is not a square subtracting a square, so you may not factorize this any further. You are done factorizing it. Let's quickly go to a 3 term for the grade 9s. When working with a 3 term, let's quickly go over this one here. The question was 2p minus 4q minus 2r. Now, taking out our highest common factor, 2 can be divided into itself once, 2 can be divided into 4 twice, and 2 can also be divided into 2 again once. You may not take out a 1, so that's why we take out a 2. Now, in this first term, there's a p, but in the second, the third term, there isn't a p. Then the q exists in the second term, but not in the first or the third term, so the q is not a factor as well. The r exists in the third term, but not in the first or the second, so the r is also not a factor. That's why only 2 will be your highest common factor. Now from here on out, you just open your bracket again. Now you say 2 can be divided into 2 once. What's going to remain? Only the p. You write down your p. Negative stays negative. 2 can be divided into 4 twice, and what will remain? Only the q, so you write down your q. Then 2 can be divided into 2 once, and then what's going to remain? Only your r. Close your bracket. Now you're going to go and simplify this, so you write down your highest common factor again. Open your bracket. 1 times p will be p, subtracting 2q, because you can't simplify that any further. Then subtracting 1 times r will just be an r, so you close your bracket again. And you are done factorizing here, because this 3 term cannot be factorized because you do not have powers. If you don't have powers in a 3 term, you cannot factorize it. If you are grade 9, I'm going to stop the video here. You can go look at previous examination papers and find the memos for that as well on the website. And if you still do not understand factorization afterwards, feel free to contact our private lecturers also on the website to schedule a private class. If you are grade 10, let's quickly go and look at your examples. If we go to grade 10, it gets a little bit more complicated, so I'm going to do this step by step with you because this is a little bit more complicated. But the steps will remain the same. So let's look at the 2 term quickly. When working with a 2 term and they say factorize this, first step is to determine what is your highest common factor and to take that out. So the highest common factor here will be 8a. I'm going to open a bracket here. And now 8 divided into 8 will be 1, and then a to the power of 3 divided by a will be a to the power of 2. Subtracting 8 divided by 8 will still be 1, and then a divided by a will also be 1. I'm going to take this a little bit further now, so it's going to be 8a. 1 times a squared will be a squared, subtracting 1 times 1 will be 1. Now I'm going to go and check. This is a 2 term, we know that by now. So now I'm going to check whether this is a square, subtracting a square. Now a square, a to the power of 2 is a square, and 1 is also a square. So that means I can factorize this bracket into 2 separate brackets. So first of all, you're going to write your highest common factor down as is again. Now you're going to put down 2 sets of brackets, and you're going to make the one a plus and the other one a negative. You take the square root of your first term and you write it down. Then you take your square root of your second term and you write that down as well. So the square root of a squared will be a. I'll put that in the first, in the set where the first term of the brackets will be, and then you do the same for the last one. The square root of the 1 goes into the last part of your brackets. Once you are done here, you are done factorizing a 2 term. This is the only way you can factorize a 2 term, and you may only factorize a 2 term if it is a square subtracting a square. Let's quickly look at your 3 term. Your 3 term factorization is a little bit more complicated, but still not as complicated as everyone thinks it is. So let's quickly look at this one. If you have a 3 term like this, once again your first step will be determine your highest common factor. Now, when looking at the coefficients, there's a 1. We know we may not take out a 1, so I'm not even going to look further for the coefficients or the known numbers. I'm going to simply go to my unknowns. Now here is a squared. The second term has an a, but my third term does not have an a. So I cannot take out a highest common factor here. There is no highest common factor. So now we're going to go to the next step that says that we need to determine the signs. We need to look at our signs, and that will help us to factorize it. Let me explain this to you. So first of all, you're going to write down your brackets. Why? Because we know that a 3 term will always factorize into a set of 2 brackets. So let's quickly look at this. My last sign is a negative. That means I know that my signs in my brackets will differ. So it's going to be positive and a negative. Now if this last sign was a positive, I know that both of my bracket signs would have been the first sign, which was a negative. So then both would have been a negative. But my last sign is a negative, so that means both of the signs in the brackets should differ. So from now on out, we're going to factorize this. Now, there's a few ways to factorize a 3 term. The way that I use is I use the trial and error method. Well, at least that's what I like to call it, the trial and error method, because that's exactly what you do. You basically test it and see if it works. If it doesn't, you're going to try and do it again. So let me explain to you how we do it. You look at your coefficient of the first term. If there is nothing in front of your unknown, then you know that they've given you an indivisible 1 right in front of your a, or your x, or your z, whatever unknown they've given you. So in this case, it's a 1. So now you're going to ask yourself, what times what will give me my first coefficient? So it's going to be 1 times 1. You write it down underneath one another. After that, you look at your last term. Okay, your last term, you're going to ask yourself, what times what will give me my last term? So now you write that down. Let's take a 5 and a 6, for instance. So let's say 5 times 6. You write that down underneath one another again. Now you're going to go and cross multiply. So you say 1 times 6 will be 6, and 1 times 5 will be 5. Now, if you add or subtract these numbers, you should get to a negative 7. 6 plus 5 will be 11, not going to work. 6 minus 5 will be 1, not going to work. 5 minus 6 will be negative 1, so it's also not a negative 7, so it's not going to work. So now you're going to try different numbers when multiplying. So once again, what times what will give me the 1? That's only going to be 1 times 1. I write it underneath one another. Now you're going to say what times what will give me 30. Let's try a 3 and a 10. So you say 3 times 10. Now cross multiply. 1 times 10 will be 10. And 1 times 3 will be 3. Now 10 plus 3 will be 13, so it's not going to work. 10 minus 3 will be plus 7. Close, but it's not going to work because I want the negative 7. So now you're going to say 3 subtracting the 10, so 3 minus 10 will be negative 7. So that means my 3 needs to be a positive and my 10 needs to be a negative. Now you know that this combo works. This combination works to get to the negative 7. So whatever you did first, you're going to basically draw a box around it, and this will be your brackets. So your first brackets will be 1, a, because we know that a times a will give me a squared. So you just write the a down again. And you're going to do that into both because there's another 1. You write the 1 there, and then a again, because a times a will be a squared. Once you get that down, you're going to go to your block again and see that a 1 plus 3. So it's going to be plus 3. And then 1 minus the 10. So the signs that you need here must go in between into the middle. You basically put that in brackets. That will be your separate brackets that you have over here. And this is the way that I use to factorize a 3 term. If you do not understand this, please watch the video again. Do some examples of this that you can find in the previous examination papers. And if you still don't understand factorization, you are welcome to contact our private lecturers for private class, a private online class, where we can assist you further with this issue. Please note that there is a 4-term factorization as well, but the 4-term factorization I'm not going to explain in this video, simply because when we get to grade 11 or grade 12, they rarely ask you a 4-term factorization. But we will cover a 4-term factorization in a separate video on its own. Thank you very much for watching, and I really hope this helps. Goodbye.